Hi, so let's get started. So basically, what I want is if we have a look at this mesh, it's pretty messy. So for one, we need to try and create a new mesh from this that's much more usable or easier to work with from our point of view. And then obviously we'll need to convert that again into another kind of mesh. So bring back that hexagon pattern effect we were looking at with the shield. So a bunch of remeshing here that we need to do, and the first part of that is just to make this more usable. Second part of that will be to do our propagation workflow, and then the third part will be to replicate the hexagon mesh that we've done before. So let's start by taking this animation and putting it at the origin. Now when I set this up, and as what would be usual for say an alembic cache, is there would be a rest position, and if not, you just set your own rest, because we basically just want this drone to not move around, so we can keep working on it and then move it back into the animated position later on. So here I'll say make a new attribute called animp, and that will be equal to p. So we just store this attribute, this position, as a new attribute, and then we can say p equals rest. So now I'm just forcing the position of each one of those points to go to its rest position, which is there, and I'm storing the actual correct position as a new attribute called animp. So that's what we want. And now we can do our remeshing. But first, I want to make a continuous mesh. If we're going to do a propagation workflow, we need to have a continuous mesh. It doesn't need it's not a technical requirement, but it will make the growing much smoother, whereas we might have to adjust attribute transfer values to make sure that at some point some area connects to an area that's not actually connected in the mesh. So I'd prefer to convert this to a VDB and just make a continuous mesh before we even go down that route. So let's do VDB from polygons. So we don't need anything too high. And then convert it back. Back to polys, and then you can see it's looking a lot thinner. So I could use the ISO value, but I'm just going to put in a reshape here to dilate it a bit. And now if I look, yeah, these rings, so before these weren't connected at all. And here they are. So as long as we get a good enough surface that looks close enough to the size of the original, but it's still connecting some pieces, then that's pretty much what I'm after there. So it's just a balance of the voxel size here and that dilation value. So it seems like I can only get that by going pretty low on the voxels. I'll try like that and maybe ray it back onto the original mesh. So I just set the ray there to minimum distance with the original geometry as a collision object. So that's not too bad actually. We can just clean this up a bit by remeshing, and then we'll try and use a point deform to attach it back to its old animation. So at this point, well, I can try use a wrangle. If it doesn't work, we'll use a point deform. So let's put down a remesh. Go a bit more detailed than that. Oops. So everything's still connected and still pretty close to the original mesh. Although I feel like this VDB might be slightly low res here. I think I need to go higher. So let's just go with 0.35 for now. It's looking pretty good. And then we need to move this. This will become our new rest basically. So we have a new rest position for this this geometry here, but we want to move it back into the animated position. So I'm going to try a wrangle quick and see what's happened to our point attributes. So here, instead of saying p equals rest, we just need to say p equals animp. And so our, why is this so slow? So it looks like our attributes weren't carried through. Oh yeah, because we're doing the VDB, so obviously that wouldn't work. So we're generating a completely brand new mesh here, and then we need to use a point deform. So storing, whether or not we need to store these position and animation attributes is kind of just a habit here for me. Whether we use them later or not, I'm not sure, because for now we've got a whole new mesh that basically isn't related to the old one, which we need to apply those same attributes to after we have this working. So we have a rest, then we have the animated version, and we have, oh, this is the static version of the animated one. So it's at rest, and this is the deforming version of that one. And we use that to point deform our new mesh. So you can see there's where we generated it, and now we're using the rest and the deformation to drive the position of this one. And it's not going to be perfect, but it doesn't really need to be. I can just smooth out the sampling here, which doesn't seem to make much of a difference. So this definitely needs to be written out. And obviously, as we've seen before, one of the problems is the remesh constantly updating. So even by forcing the position of those points to be at the origin or at rest, it doesn't affect how many times this has to cook, because this file is still going. So I think for sure at some point here, maybe over here, I'll just put in this time shift. Set that to frame 1. And that's better. So here we have a static, non-updating mesh that's a lot cleaner, and it's all connected. So we can use this to work on our propagation, which is essentially the base of the rest of the effects that go on top of this. So we need a clean way to generate a mask on this geometry, which we'll use as a base. So I'll definitely need to write this out, but let me do a quick test here of the propagation so we can check this geometry for holes and make sure it works fine. So I set that to black. And then, oh, I need to move this, yeah, I need to duplicate this rectangle here. Before we do any of this, I'm going to move it back to its rest position. So here is where we really need to store this NMP. And because this new mesh now, we can jump back to the NMP position later on. So here we have our rest. And I want the propagation to start in this back section here. So I'm going to select some points now. Oh. Set that to points. Why can I not select anything? Oh, there we go. So something like that. So we just keep those 2 points. So those will be our propagation source points, and this will be our mesh at rest. So we'll put down the solver, and I've colored this one black. We have these points as white. And then the way I usually do this, and maybe it's the long way around or the wrong way around, I'm not sure, but it works, is I'm going to transfer those 2 source points, so these ones, transfer that color onto previous frame. So just a small amount, and we can adjust this depending on how dense our mesh is, basically. So if it's not propagating, chances are you need to just increase your distance threshold here, because your points on your mesh aren't close enough. So we want to now remove any points with a color less than 1, and then we take that transfer again and transfer this new deleted geometry, transfer the color from that onto input 1, probably by the same amount. And if we were let me just show you this again. So all we're doing is we're not dealing with the main input yet, which is our drone. We're just taking the points that we want as the source, we're transferring color to the previous frame, removing everything except that colored area, and then using that as a new source every frame. So every frame it'll attribute transfer and then delete, attribute transfer and delete, keep that white area and transfer it back onto input 1. So there you can see it tried to go, but my mesh isn't dense enough for the propagation to have a real effect. So let me go a little bit higher on the resample. Ah, I've lost my points. So this could be, we could set this up that it's much more procedural. So all I need is I could have 2 points here in space. These don't need to be attached to that. So, well, as an example, if I come over here and change this back to, was it 1? Yeah, so that's where we wanted the 2 points to be. It doesn't matter about the input mesh, because we're just attribute transferring from this point position. So I can just lock this. So that's not exactly procedural, but at least I know I don't need those positions to update. Another way to do it would be just to put 2 little spheres in those spaces, and then we just always use those. But this should work fine, so let's try. I mean, the only problem with this is if you unlock it, then you lose that position, but I don't think it's the end of the world. So there we have it. So every frame we're attribute transferring some color, removing everything except that color, and retransferring it back onto input 1. So we just need to make sure that that value or the density of our mesh is enough to cover the entire geometry here. So you see we're losing some spots, and there's some black spots there. So we could just increase the distance a little bit. And another thing to think about with this distance is it will affect the speed. So it could be good to choose a density of mesh that feels good to start with, pretty high density probably, and then adjust this value and do flipbooks until the timing feels right. So this is all very nice and smooth, but does the timing feel right in the camera? So that's what we need to work on. So let me end this video here, and I'll write out some ROPs. And I won't change anything else. We can come back and start working on the timing of this propagation through the shot camera and make sure we're happy with that. So I'll see you in the next video.